Something is watching from the shadows.
I was afraid to go outside for a month after that, especially at night.
A sinister presence.
Something really happened up here.
This thing had a reptile-type head.
The creature attacks its prey with toxic gas.
When you look at the skull, you're startled.
There's no part of it that is the same as a human.
Monster Quest scours Appalachia for the beast known as the Flatwoods Monster.
What was that?
People around the world report seeing monsters. Real or imaginary? Science searches for answers on Monster Quest. The remote forests of central West Virginia. These steep, rocky mountains have an extensive cave system and sit on top of one of the world's largest deposits of coal and natural gas. The people here live in relative isolation, but they may not be alone.
It was a good 9 feet tall. It was this reptilian-type creature.
It gave off gas. It had lights.
It's so misshapen. It's so different from what you expect to see.
Eyewitnesses reported 10 to 12 foot tall, terrifying creature, reptilian in appearance. It is said to have long, thin arms, 2 fingers, and scaly skin. The monster appears to hover over its victims in some sort of craft or suit that emits a piercing noise and dangerous toxic gases.
Everybody's scared of the unknown, and this was the unknown.
10-year-old Freddie May and his brother were playing in a schoolyard with a group of boys when they saw something strange in the sky.
It was getting late, just about time to quit playing because we couldn't see. And we seen this, looked like a ball of fire come across the mountain and over our heads, and you could tell it was slowing down and coming in.
The boys ran to the May house. May's mother, his 17-year-old cousin, and their dog went to investigate. Climbing the hill where the fireball had landed, they were met with a rolling bank of smoke and a strange odor.
I've described it like the old televisions that had the tubes in them and they'd burn out and you get that smell, something like that.
The dog ran ahead, barking frantically. A moment later, it retreated, terrified.
That was something up there that was moving around,
His cousin noticed 2 lights hovering nearby. He turned his flashlight toward it, and the group saw something unimaginable.
It was kind of hovering, no legs or prongs sticking down to hold it up, and it moved. The top part, of course, it went in like an ace of spades. From that down, it was like tubes. They were all the way around the thing, in a circle. They figured about 10 to 12 feet. I've always described it as 2 like portholes on a boat.
The eerie thing emitted a sharp hiss and suddenly began to glide toward them.
Of course, that scared us.
May's cousin, sickened by the fog, vomited, and his mother found a splash of an oily substance across her clothing. It was a night the group will never forget.
I know I was afraid to go outside for a month after that, especially at night.
Flatwoods, West Virginia is 70 miles northeast of Charleston. Since the May encounter here 50 years ago, there have been dozens of reports in connection with a mystery creature locals call the Flatwoods Monster. Monster Quest has come here to begin its search. Reports of a monstrous humanoid creature, something that is a hybrid between a beast and human, have plagued this area for decades. And the sightings are always within a few miles of where the creature was first spotted back in 1952, near a place called the Bailey Fisher Farm. Some question the existence of hybrid humans, and instead claim a known animal could have been misidentified. Joe Nickel is a researcher for the Center of Skeptical Inquiry.
People talked about, oh, maybe it was a possum, maybe it was a buck deer, and so forth. But they're just responding to the shining eyes.
Nickel believes that what the witnesses saw was distorted by their emotional state.
There's what's called expectant attention. That is, if you've got a mindset, if you're expecting to see something, that will affect what you see. You bet they were apprehensive. Sure, they were psyched up. And so when they see something then that's frightening, some shining eyes in the dark, and it that quick comes at them, I don't think they had time to think, but simply to react. And they reacted perfectly naturally. They panicked.
While similar sightings have been reported across the U.S., Flatwoods has remained the epicenter. Now, Monster Quest will search the area of the most recent sightings using high-tech night vision cameras. They'll conduct the search using a remote mounting device to avoid getting too close and alerting the monster. The science team will test the skull of an alleged hybrid human, thought to be similar to the Flatwoods monster.
There's still a lot of sightings up here to this day.
The expedition team will be led by author Frank Ficino, who has spent the last 2 decades collecting evidence from the area where the creature was first seen.
Well, back about 15 years ago, I was up here and I had full access to the old Bailey Fisher Farm. And I found some unknown black plastic-like material that was strewn around the area of the farm.
Joining him is physicist Dr. Stan Friedman and John Bainbridge, a retired police officer.
Well, we'll dig down in here and see how far down we can go.
They will be looking for physical evidence and conducting a forensic examination of Ficino's research, including the samples of the mysterious black substance.
And the limb was 12 feet off the ground, so they knew it had to be less than that high, I'd say.
And right in about this area here, she saw...
The team starts on the original hilltop, where the creature was first seen.
When I seen it, it was already down in this area right
So it had moved.
May shows them the exact location of the encounter.
Area. So you saw it come into about this area here. So it moved a few feet.
Their search centers on the tree closest to where the monster was seen hovering, and where the gas seemed to originate. This 100-foot-tall white oak began to die and rot shortly after the incident, exposing its inner core.
It was certainly there when I was here before. Okay, guys, I'm going to need just one of those plastic containers for the time being.
The team hopes that toxicology tests will now reveal what could have killed the tree and whether it was from natural causes.
The object was to dig, bore, and collect. It's pretty soft down through the middle. To get as low into the soil or into the base of the tree where this object was seen, in hope that some of the solution that was spewed from this object may have penetrated the roots of the tree system or the soil, and something might still remain.
The team tests for radiation and other toxins to see if there is another explanation for the sickness the witnesses reported.
Nothing but background, guys.
While no residual chemicals or radiation are detected by the team, it is clear that the encounters with this monster may have affected witnesses, some even fatally.
What's been happening with the witnesses as of today, the majority of them have been diagnosed with throat cancer or lung cancer. Kathleen May passed away just a few months ago, and a couple of the other witnesses are really struggling bad. Freddie May has cancer. His brother, Eddie, had cancer a couple years ago. So it seems that the majority of the people that were up there that night, it may be related, it may not, but it seems awful coincidental because they had smelled this gas that they seem to have throat and lung cancer.
Monster Quest is in West Virginia, hunting for evidence of the beast known as the Fleckwood Monster. Strange tales of human-like monsters that float or descend from an orb of light have been around for centuries. In 27 BC, the Roman historian Livy described a glowing altar in the sky from which the forms of men appeared, dressed in shining light.
Historically, what a lot of people forget is that this is not just a modern phenomenon.
The first written evidence of this creature's presence in America occurred in the early 1500s. Spanish explorers following the Mississippi River came in contact with Native Americans who claimed to have seen terrifying monsters that appeared with bright lights and inflicted electric shocks.
There are a lot of these stories. They haven't been adequately researched. They're observed all over the world.
Throughout history, only a few of the accounts of humanoid monsters are supported by any kind of physical evidence.
She said that the entire body was misshapen.
A young Texas girl was exploring an abandoned mine shaft. When she stumbled across an opening into an ancient cavern.
And when she got in, she found that there was a full human skeleton lying on its back on the dirt. And beside it, she noticed a mound that looked kind of like a grave. She dug it out with her own hands and she found a full skeleton. She said that the entire body was misshapen.
Lying beside the skeleton were the partial remains of another body.
When she saw the two skulls together, she realized that one was very different from the other.
The strangely misshapen skull is believed by some to be the best evidence yet of the existence of monster humanoids. Lloyd Pye acquired it and conducted research on its origins.
I knew enough to know immediately that this was indeed something very highly unusual.
Pye had the skull carbon dated and found it to be more than 900 years old. He called the skull the Star Child because of its small size and otherworldly shape.
The anomalies of the skull, I think, start with completely different from human eye sockets.
The skull could possibly be from a hybrid humanoid. The physical differences include eye sockets that are less than an inch deep, half that of a normal human. The opening for the optic nerve, usually in the back of the socket, is located at the inside corner.
They were just a completely different eyeball than what we have, a completely different eye mechanism than what we have.
DNA testing has only deepened the mystery.
They recovered the mitochondrial DNA very easily of the Star Child. First test, no problem. It has a human mother. All that was left was to do the nuclear DNA recovery of the Star Child. And in 6 full, complete, rigorous attempts to recover its nuclear DNA, they were unable to do so.
The skull weighs half as much as a normal human skull, and the bone itself is less than half as thick, yet far denser. Additionally, the skull lacks normal sinus cavities and a brow ridge.
If you do chemical analysis of the bone, which we've done with a scanning electron microscope, what we discovered was that the bone of the star child is not really like human bone. It's more like tooth enamel. We also found fibers that were woven through the matrix of the bone. And the reason this was surprising is because there's no other bone on Earth that has fibers woven through the matrix of the bone like a reinforcing kind of thing. They were very durable because the Dremel blade had shredded the ends of them, but it hadn't cut them free. It hadn't cut them completely off like you would think it would. Very, very surprising.
Now, the Monster Quest science team will perform new analysis. Bioarchaeologist Dr. Susan Meister will attempt to determine if the skull is human or any other known creature.
When you look at the skull, you're startled because it looks quite abnormal. You have a small upper part of the face, and then you have this very expanded lateral portion of the vault, and then you have a very flat posterior or back part of the skull. So it looks quite odd.
Dr. Meister will also try to determine the age, gender, ancestry, and the cause of its abnormalities.
I would first like to look it over, just looking at the general morphology, in terms of trying to determine what might have affected it. So was the skull exposed to the weather, to the elements? Had it been buried at one time? Is there any indication that modification occurred? And then also to determine if there's anything unusual or abnormal about the skull that may indicate that it's not a human skull.
She will also test the skull to determine if it is indeed made of a substance harder than human bone.
By applying the shore hardness test, I hope to be able to get a good reading on the resistance of the skull to this pressure, and therefore to see if it's significantly different than the hardness of a known human skull.
The fact that the skull is not complete complicates her analysis.
The skull's missing most of the face, so all you have are the top borders of the orbits.
Bill Munns, a specialist in forensic reconstruction, will examine a cast of the skull. He will fill in the missing anatomy and see if it bears any resemblance to the Flatwoods Monster.
My first perception was to see how different this skull was than a normal human figure.
He will then build a model of what this hybrid human would look like.
Is this biologically a human skull, an alien skull, or something halfway in between? In my particular approach to it, I decided that the only responsible approach that I can take is to treat it as if it is entirely human. So in my approach, I decided to use everything as biologically realistic and credible as I can.
The expedition is in Frametown, West Virginia, the site of the latest encounter with a strange, half-human creature locals call the Flatwoods Monster. The team will set up camp at a vantage point called James Knob, the highest peak in the Appalachian foothills. The team inflates a helium balloon to carry a thermal night vision camera to conduct a stealth reconnaissance of the mountainside. The witnesses describe an orb or fireball-like light. One theory is that a release of gases from the underground coal systems may be causing hallucinations. This gaseous release could create a heat signature that would show up on the infrared camera. Ignited gas would also explain the fireball and glowing orbs that the witnesses have seen.
You guys ready?
Good.
Ready.
There we go. There she goes.
Monster Quest is searching the Appalachian Mountains for evidence of the Flatwoods Monster, which has been spotted here many times over the last 60 years.
This thing is coming towards the car.
George and Edith Snitowski were traveling through Braxton County with their baby when they had a bizarre encounter. Frank Ficino interviewed George Snitowski shortly before his death in 1996.
As a couple were proceeding into the Frametown area, the car suddenly went dead.
Snitowski got out to check the battery, but found nothing wrong.
George had turned around and he looked off into the woods, and he saw something glowing.
Cautiously, he walked toward the strange light.
And as he started nearing closer towards it, he started feeling these pricklings going through his body like a low-voltage electrical shock, and it went through his whole body.
Just as Snitowski was about to turn back, he was overcome by a sickening sulfur smell that knocked him to his knees.
Something was coming up behind George.
Snitowski staggered to his feet to find a monster towering over him.
It was a good 9 feet tall. It was this reptilian-type creature. From the head to the waist, he could actually see this humanoid creature. But from the waist down, it looked like a booster rocket or a cone-shaped object. It's exactly what was described in Flatwoods. And it was hovering and coming across the ground.
Snitowski ran for the car.
And he looked up straight through the windshield of the car. And this 9-foot-tall humanoid was looking down at him. The area is covered with this low-lying smoke, sulfur-type smell, and they're gagging, they're choking.
The couple huddled in fear as the bizarre creature slowly circled their car before gliding back into the woods.
And this creature actually leaned down with its long spindly arm, and instead of having 5 digits, there were actually 2 long fingers, and it touched the hood of the car. And when it touched the hood of the car, it actually burnt through the paint, right down to the primer.
The sighting occurred just 24 hours after the first witnesses reported seeing the beast. Ficino worked with Snitowski to create this drawing of the creature, which differed only slightly from what Freddie May saw.
The conclusion that I have drawn from this thing is this seems to have been the same humanoid seen in both cases. When it was seen on September 12th, it wore a full suit. It was basically like a suit of armor. When it was seen the following night, the upper portion of the suit was gone.
The science team has located samples gathered after the original sighting and is examining them.
The vial that I have here contains those black samples that were pointed out to me as possibly being suspect.
Chemist Dr. Philip Doherty is also comparing modern soil and wood samples recovered from the same area by the expedition team. Dr. Doherty is looking for trace toxins that might have nauseated witnesses or caused them to hallucinate.
The extraction process was designed to remove any volatile or semi-volatile materials from the soil and the wood that would have not been normal or natural within the environment.
The expedition team has launched its aerial reconnaissance of the area surrounding the most recent sighting.
There's a lot of weird things seen around here. There's a lot of things going on in this one particular area of the mountains where it's a mile to a mile and a half spread out area where all these funny things are going on.
The team has a thermal camera in the air and a second one on the ground. They should be able to detect anything that gives off a heat signature.
What's that? See that red? That's it.
That shows up in the camera.
I think we got a hot spot up there, Frank.
Monster Quest is investigating sightings of monster humanoids in the isolated wilderness of Appalachia. The beast was most recently seen by a lone hunter.
What startled him is the eyes.
Joe Smith was hunting for deer a half-mile southeast of the hilltop known as James Knob.
It was overgrown. There was a lot of weeds, and backdrop is all of these trees.
Suddenly, the hunter noticed something strange along the tree line.
There were these three humanoid types creatures. He told me they were like a white color. The tops of their heads were like an ace of spades. He described these creatures as having the same covering. They weren't flesh. He didn't see any faces, and they were staring at him. He said they were absolutely still.
The hunter stared back, frozen with fear, his weapon forgotten.
As he was staring at them, he was telling me about the eyes. These eyes were not like eyeballs. They were like openings with eyeballs in behind them.
The man's description is similar to those of previous witnesses.
They're amazingly similar. So it's hard for me to imagine that what was seen was a hallucination.
Some take this recent sighting as evidence that the Flatwoods monster has returned. Others, however, are skeptical and believe that mass hysteria is a more likely explanation.
Nausea is a symptom of hysteria. So can be other physical reactions. For example, you can lose your voice, or you can cough. There's a sort of visceral effect that that hysteria can have, a sort of physiological effect. There is what's called mass hysteria, a contagious reaction among people that one person can spark. If one person panics, other people may panic.
Nickel believes the original sighting was exaggerated, a product of its time.
You will search, I think, in vain for a case quite like Flatwoods prior to 1952. If we look at this in the Cold War context, there was a kind of general mass hysteria. The general climate was such that people were looking to the skies.
Nickel says the publicity surrounding the first sighting colored the accounts that came afterward.
Once you get a report, it sparks other reports. This is what is well known as contagion. The Flatwoods case got a lot of attention. It got newspaper media attention, and it set up almost a new genre of a type of monster. The power of suggestion is very strong. You can have something on the mind, something put out there, and people start looking for it and focusing on it, and they will report it. They will see it.
The expedition team has suspended a highly sensitive infrared thermal camera from a helium balloon 150 feet in the air. It will show any heat sources for a mile in any direction. The team is hoping that this thermal technology will identify what witnesses have seen here.
They saw the Flatwoods monster craft touch down in the back area here, John.
I think we got a hot spot up there, Frank.
Closer examination reveals that the hotspot that the team saw on the hillside was a buildup of residual heat beneath an opening in a canopy of shade trees. The next morning, the team moves down the hilltop to the spot where the hunter reported an encounter with 3 humanoid creatures. The trail leading into the site is nearly impassable. One theory holds that the encounters were hallucinations caused by the release of gases that form around the massive coal deposits that run close to the surface. Now, for the first time, the sighting area will be thoroughly checked for toxic gas releases.
We
looking for carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide, all of which could have been present in the area because of mining operations of coal being released into the atmosphere.
Nothing registers. The area is clear. The Monster Quest science team is testing what may be a hybrid monster humanoid skull, measuring its unusual density. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Susan Meister will subject the skull to the shore hardness test. This will gauge its resistance and show if it is greater than that of a human skull.
The shore hardness test was designed to look at the strength of a material, like a polymer or ceramics, in order to assess its strength against forces being applied to it. So we thought that by applying the shore hardness test to bone, we may be able to get some insight into the strength of the bone.
The test will be applied to 3 skull samples: the supposed hybrid skull, a normal adult skull, and a skull of a child. A durometer will measure the resistance the skull makes on a spring-loaded needle. Forensic artist Bill Munns is using a cast of the skull to rebuild the face of the creature. He hopes this reconstruction will determine whether it resembles the elongated head and oversized glowing eyes described by witnesses to the Flatwoods Monster.
The eye socket itself is unusually shallow.
Munns has already rebuilt the missing jaw and unusually small teeth. He moves on to the unconventional eyes.
The first reaction would be to simply put a round eye in it, but it would tend to bulge out almost like a frog eye, and I felt that biologically that's not likely. So what I did for the eye in this particular case is actually first design in a computer the shape of an eyeball that would allow a very, very large flat back area where all of it's in focus at once. And then simply round it out so it was a form of a kind of a compressed oval. And that sat into the eye socket perfectly. The eye would not be able to rotate terribly well left, right, up, down, but because the entire retina is in focus at the same time, it allows for in-focused peripheral vision, so you don't actually need to rotate the eye.
Munns begins reconstructing the neck muscles and discovers something unusual.
Within a normal human being, they're usually sufficiently inside the neck area that the neck can still have kind of a basic round cylindrical form. In this particular instance, those processes where the muscle actually attaches to at the base of the skull were extended way out to the side of the face, and it produced a very, very unusual neck shape.
Finally, the face of the monster humanoid emerges.
Once the face itself was fleshed out, I could forget about all the musculature underneath it, forget about all of the skull structure and bone structure underneath it, step back and really just take a look at this face for the first time.
Monster Quest is searching for evidence of strange humanoid creatures seen in West Virginia more than half a century ago. This man says he came face to face with a monster in 1952. This investigator believes he may have found physical evidence of the beast. This author believes that this skull is a 900-year-old hybrid humanoid. And this forensic anthropologist may finally be able to determine its origin. Dr. Susan Meister has completed her analysis of the skull.
My findings indicate that it is the skull of a child. I came to that conclusion based on the fact that the morphology is consistent with a human child, the dentition is consistent with a human child, the shape and contour and size of the skull are consistent with a human child.
It proved impossible to determine gender or ancestry of the individual, but Dr. Meister was able to uncover some details about the skull.
There was no evidence of disease observable on the skull. and the modification was also not due to warping or due to a burial environment. And the more I looked at the skull, the more I became convinced that the modification to the skull was intentionally inflicted as part of a cultural practice.
Some Native American tribes have historically bound their infants' still soft skulls to cause them to grow into an elongated shape, a practice known as cradle boarding.
We have seen cranial modification, intentional cranial modification, in almost all parts of the world. It's not cradle boarding, but it is modification to the occipital region or the back of the skull.
If it is an intentional modification, it is unlike any Dr. Meister has encountered before.
I've never seen modification like this, to this extent, or even close to this extent. The degree of modification seen in this particular skull is more significant and to a greater degree than I've seen in any other skull I've analyzed.
The results of the shore hardness test suggest the skull is made of a substance harder than normal human bone.
The shore hardness test was conducted on 3 separate individuals. The first individual was the skull that we've been analyzing, the star child. The second individual was an adult human female, and the third individual was a human child. And what we saw was that the 2 definitively human skulls were within the acceptable range, 65 to 85, using the shore hardness scale, and that the star child was a little bit higher, but still within that upper 80s, and we had one reading in the 90s.
When I went into this, I didn't have any head or face visualized in my mind that I was aspiring to accomplish. And I was actually surprised.
The reconstruction reveals a face that does not look entirely human. The team has gathered samples from the site where the creature was first seen in 1952. Soil, parts of a decayed tree, and a black plastic-like material that was scattered over the ground.
There was a good variety of wood samples and soil samples that were tested. The 2 analysis, the one with the mass spectrometer that absolutely identified any compounds present, matched that with the gas chromatograph and the more sensitive detector. There were no semi-volatile or volatile materials that were unusual that was associated with this.
Analysis of the black particles reveal they were natural organic materials, charred as if subjected to extreme heat.
The estimate that I gave with this was that it was either very decayed wood or charcoal of some type.
More than half a century ago, witnesses saw something that could not be explained.
It's the old scientific thing about extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, an extraordinary level of proof.
This expedition has revealed some interesting facts. No sign of radiation or toxic contamination was found in Flatwoods, West Virginia. But there was charred organic matter there, giving credibility to what the witnesses saw. No gas leaks were found that could explain their stories as hallucinations. And a comparison of witness descriptions shows they were likely seeing the same thing.
I've met little kids who have told me stories, 5 years old, and people in their 90s, and what's very interesting is the amount of Braxton County residents who walk up to me and say, "Do you know this is still going on today?"
We need to open up our thinking about these things instead of in isolation. And of course, our egos get in the way. We need to look forward and not backward, that maybe some of the beliefs we have aren't justified. But that's what life is all about, learning to face the new.
Somebody asked me if I believe in UFOs and people from things from outer space. I would have probably said no. But now I know